Okay, so what did you think of that video? It's really good, right? Do you see how much time it takes? Do you see the amount of materials it requires? And I want you to think about like those animals. They had to be born, they had to be raised, protected, fed, watered, and then slaughtered. So that takes a lot of resources just to get to them to the slaughtering. And then the time of making their skin into parchment receptive to ink, and then the time for the artist to then write out all of those very careful words, right? And think about the skill required by the binder who's threading that thread. Where did that thread come from? Where does the ink come from? Where do the feathers come from? Where do the powders, the minerals, the gold, all of those things, the materials alone takes a lot of time. And then the artistry and the skill of your labor is another amount of time. I'm trying to emphasize this because when we look at a manuscript, we need to appreciate the amount of time and money that has gone into the making of a single page, and then extrapolate to that entire book. It's a statement of money and power and influence for those who make it and those who have paid for it, the owner of that manuscript. So taking that idea of power, of money, of resources available to the owner of this manuscript, let's take a look back at the Qur'an as an object. So here we're seeing the double layout. We would call this a bifolium. Bi meaning dual or two, and folio is a page. So a bifolium is 2 leaves, 4 pages because there's also the back sides of these as well. And when we look at the details of these 2 pages, we need to understand that this is a luxury item. This is an insanely expensive, very impressive artwork. And it's all planned out even before it started. So we see let me get a closer look here. We're looking at the left page. We see the careful movements of the line work, and everything is not only perfectly lined up, but lined up on the left and the right sides. If we were to look at the proportions, each page of this manuscript has a 2:3 proportion. A 2:3 proportion means that the text is 2 high and 3 deep. And that also makes the width of the text equal to the height of the folio, the height of the page. Now you're probably thinking, Ms. Cortez, what is this, a math class? Why are we talking about this? What we're seeing here is a balance of proportions. We're trying to find a visual harmony that is expressing the harmony of the words of God. So the proportions here of 2:3, which then echo the 3 of the height, are visually supposed to be giving you a sense of balance, of peace, as the Word of God is being read to you, or you're hearing it, or you're reading it yourself. So we're seeing this gorgeous balance of the visual, spiritual, the audio worlds coming together. And remember, this composition would have continued throughout the rest of the book, even though we're only looking at 2 pages. And this 2:3 proportion, it's a common layout that we see in the probably the first 400 years of the development and spread of Islam in Qur'an manuscripts. Going back to this page, we see this beautiful gold band. The gold that we see here is actual gold, right? It's the actual leaf, gold leaf that has been pressed, glued onto the page, so we know that that's really expensive. And then the calligraphy here reads the next chapter or next surah. So the marking is not only supposed to be impressive, gold, very expensive, but it also helps mark the next chapter. Remember, there are 114 chapters. So it helps our eye visually anchor into and transition into the next chapter of the book. Inside of the band, we see this beautiful movement or flow. Remember those arabesque lines that we talked about, that undulating. Look at this gorgeous pattern that looks like corded rope that lines the entirety of the chapter heading. And then we come over here and we see these jewel tones like a brooch. So it is a manuscript, but it speaks to power and beauty and majesty that we see in textiles, that we see in jewelry and metalwork. And what we don't see are any figural images, right? This is an aniconic religion, and so the sacred text will not have any human or animal forms because that would be considered inappropriate. So the ornamentation is there to heighten the sacredity of this object rather than representations of humans or animals. The script type, the type of calligraphy, the style of calligraphy that's being used here. Let me just scroll to the definition. We'll come back to this, don't worry. The type of script, the type of calligraphy style we're looking at here is called Kufic. So this is your next definition, Kufic. Kufic is a strikingly angular calligraphy with short vertical and elongated horizontal strokes. And it's written in a wide format like this 2:3 ratio. It gets its name from the Iraqi town of Al-Kufa, which is one of the earliest centers not only of Islamic learning, but where we see this script developing as a part of Qur'an manuscript production. So let me get into a closer detail. So as I said, it's got these characteristic sharp endings, right? The beautiful triangular tip of all of the lines, and then these long horizontal bands and these short verticals. Now, this image here is a zoom in of the page with an overlay of line work. The lines are not actually, the white lines that you're seeing, those are not actually on the page, but they're there to help us illustrate the further control of the line work. And the scribe has not only given us the beauty of the calligraphy, but the measured control of those lines, how each element is in proportion to the next, again, speaks to the power and the talent and the dignity of the sacred text, the dignity of the patron, the dignity of the calligrapher. This is for a wealthy and powerful elite leader in the Islamic world. And this uniformity of the word is a reflection of the harmony and the perfection of the word of Allah, the word of God. To get this kind of beautiful balance and line work, parchment paper, when it's very fine, like vellum, is almost transparent, and so it is often placed on top of a guide line. Like, you know, whenever you want to write on a piece of white paper, but you want to have nice lines, and so you put a piece of ruled lined paper underneath it, and then your lines come out. Same idea. Also, we have some evidence in different folios where maybe a scored line has been put onto the page with just light pressure, and then that would become your invisible line that you would follow. looking at it, it's just impressive. It's so gorgeous, isn't it? There is a really great example of another Qur'an fragment in the British Library, and I want us to see that because the website is pretty cool about how you can interact with the site or with the book. Okay. It's also written in Kufic. And then let me just hide that. I'm going to zoom in. So you see how all of these pages follow a very similar proportion of height and width. So the uniformity. And then here, look, here's another band defining the next chapter. One thing that students often ask when they look at Kufic script is, what are these dots? What do the dots mean? Well, Kufic developed a series of signs or symbols to aid in the pronunciation of the text, because you would not only need to read the text, but you need to pronounce it correctly because you're going to recite the text to a larger group. And so these dots are there to help those who are reading aloud to a larger mass. Here, let me zoom in again. Let's do this page. So the red dots indicate vowels. The short black diagonal strokes, those indicate different letters of similar shape. So you're understanding those as two different letters that have been combined together in the Kufic script. And then the gold dots indicate the end of a verse, right? So a formal kind of pause. And it's just so gorgeous, isn't it? I just want us to appreciate the manuscripts as physical manifestations of the beauty and the splendor and the wonder of God as recited to Muhammad. And then that recitation, that reciting, that hearing of the word and seeing of the word is echoed in the beautiful craftsmanship and the careful composition of the text itself. It's speaking to the dignity of the sacred text, but also the wealth and the power of those who owned these manuscripts.